Good morning, everybody. It is day 124 of Spiritual Healthcare. Welcome. Welcome. We are getting closer to Halloween, which is so exciting. I hope you guys are all going to be celebrating it this year because I think it's really important. It's important that we continue on and celebrate the things that we value and the things that bring us joy. We don't want to negate the stuff that's bringing us joy right now. So welcome to Spiritual Healthcare, everybody. And today I want to talk about some really interesting things. One thing that has come up in the news over the last year or so quite readily, which is the Mothman, and as well as the nature of fear. The nature of fear. What is its value? What are we doing with it? How are we processing it? And how can it be a good thing and a bad thing? Because with Halloween coming up, of course, it's all about scary things anyway. So good morning to Dan and Ed, and nice to see everyone. I got the most wonderful message on YouTube the other day about the people that are binging the spiritual healthcare videos every weekend and just really enjoying it, and it just makes me so happy to know that is happening. That makes me really, really happy. So as I say, today is going to be cool because I want to get into the Mothman. I want to get into the nature of fear, because the Mothman is so significant in our culture and throughout history as something that is sort of it is the precursor to disaster, right? It's an omen, and or it's considered an omen, even though people physically see this creature flying around. And there's been noted cases throughout history about Mothman and what it is. Some of you guys have probably seen the movie that came out called Mothman with Richard Gere, and it was brilliant. It was based on a true story and about an entity that called itself Indrid Cold, and it was really fascinating. A true story. So good morning to everybody. It is so good to see you all. Good morning, Sally. Nice to see you. And yeah, we got so much to talk about today. And I hope you guys had a really, really, really great week. We're coming up to some pretty major events right now. As I say, we're coming up to Halloween. We're coming up to the election in the United States. And there's a lot going on right now. There's a lot of emotionally charged stuff happening. And I think it's really important that we start to look at things like fear, look at, how it's being, and how it can be utilized, right? How it can be utilized for the good and the bad as well. So this is going to be really good. So good morning to all of you. And so I wanted to get into this starting with this concept of Mothman, because for those of you guys who have not heard about this, it is a sort of half cryptid, half spiritual creature who's basically said to almost be like a giant moth or bat, where it is almost like Sasquatch with wings, right? So very little neck, great big red eyes, and huge wings. And it's often seen within hours or days before a major event, and usually it's a catastrophe. Usually it's something that goes on that's not so good. In the case of one of the most famous accounts of Mothman, it took place in Point Pleasant, and there was multiple sightings of this Mothman that was showing up and scaring the hell out of people. People didn't know what it was. It would show up at night, and people would see these great big red eyes and these great big wings, and they didn't know what it was. So skeptics were saying immediately that people were seeing, oh, it's a big owl, it's bats, they had all sorts of explanations, all sorts of misidentifications and whatnot. And there was a journalist who ended up investigating the Point Pleasant Mothman and ended up very emotionally entwined with it. But long story short, what ended up happening was the Mothman encounters quit after a massive bridge collapse, and it was seen hanging around this bridge. So anyway, since 2017, the Mothman has now basically, or what people feel, has taken up residence in Chicago. And both the city and the suburbs have reported seeing this Mothman type creature. So multiple witnesses have described it like taller than a human being, bat-like wings and glowing eyes, and they've nicknamed him the Chicago Mothman. So the journalist that wrote and was featured in the movie The Mothman Prophecies, John Keel, was definitely, of course, that was brought up because that was in 1975, and people were realizing that this was very, very similar. So a recent sighting came in November of last year, 2019, and a truck driver claimed to see the creature. He was on his job. He was at O'Hare Airport, and he saw what he thought was this humongous bird standing beside one of the airport fences, and it had its wings out and whatnot. Logan Square Bar in January 2018, 2018, basically had said it was very similar. He saw the same thing. So they're not new to this area. In 1977, in July, there was another encounter as well. So there has been just multiple, but people are kind of beginning to wonder about Chicago. What is going on in Chicago? So as I say, like, Mothman has kind of come up through pop culture. It's come up through all of these various means and whatnot, and it tends to stir up a lot of anxiety and fear with people because they do associate it with some impending tragedy. So considering the amount of time the Mothman basically seems to have been spending, people have been talking in the sort of cryptozoology community and the spirit community about whether or not the Mothman has been seen during the pandemic for a reason. So it's very interesting. It's an interesting topic, but it brings up this notion about fear, right? Because we've been dealing a lot with fear in the press. We've been dealing with a lot of narratives. I know I've read quite a number of articles now, about things that have been going on where, it will be very much a clickbait headline. And you go through the article and it's right near the bottom of the article that they kind of change their story and tell the truth about what the actual incident entailed or what was going on. So there's a lot of clickbait kind of headlines coming up that I think are causing people to look forward and see catastrophe. They're seeing tragedy in the same way that when we see the Mothman, we automatically think that, oh my God, there's something going to happen. And it makes you begin to wonder, knowing that we create our own reality, we create and we manifest, and we've been looking at things like the recent notes about the Global Consciousness Project. Of course, the random number generators have been being monitored during the debates to see, what level of consciousness is being affected by, these massive events. And I think what we don't realize sometimes, especially when it comes down to, a microcosm of, say, a paranormal investigation, people often ask me, how do you not freak out and just, be terrified of being in these spaces? And I think we have to understand that the emotional nature of fear is not what actually stops us from moving forward, okay? It's actually an unwillingness to be afraid that is actually what ends up stopping us, because sometimes the fear of being afraid is actually worse than what the event actually is. So what I mean by this is people's visions or interpretations or what they expect to get out of, say, let's use the example of a haunted place. What they expect to get is usually not what they get. And it's funny because when you get into the realm of television and media, this can be very disappointing for a lot of producers and network people, because they do rely on a lot of eyeballs and a lot of clicks and views and things like that to keep up their finances, to keep up their ratings, to keep up, like, all of it's all interconnected. So when they go into a haunted place and they're expecting all of this amazing things to happen, and it's not what they expect, oftentimes we will turn around and make up a story, or they will make up a story in order to fuel the ratings and things like that. And this is what we get in television. So fear is really the number one fear of humans, and it sits right next to rejection, because rejection is a big one. People are terrified of being rejected. But ultimately, as I say, what stops you is really the unwillingness to be afraid and encounter what we're actually afraid of. And it's usually the story that we tell ourselves in our minds that is way worse than the stories than the actual reality of the event itself. So fear honestly has never harmed anybody. In fact, it can be such an asset. There was an amazing author, and his name is Gavin de Becker, and he wrote an amazing book called The Gift of Fear. And if you guys have ever read The Gift of Fear, if you have not read it, I highly recommend it. If you have read it, read it again. It's absolutely brilliant, and it really goes to show that fear can be such an indicator. It's an emotional indicator of something that we have to pay attention to. And sometimes that thing is not necessarily something outside of ourselves. And this is where it can get really confusing, and it can screw people up, and it can screw people up, especially if you're investigating the paranormal or anything like that. We often associate fear with something that has to be outside of ourselves. And that's not always the case at all. Sometimes the fear is actually there because it's hitting on a button that is already pre-installed. Okay, so say for example, if somebody comes up and calls you, I don't know, calls you a terrible name or something like that, if you don't know that person and there's no real, emotional attachment, usually you're just probably going to look at them and go, like, I don't know who you are, get out of my way, what are you doing in my day? And you're going to move on. You're going to move on from your day. You're going to think it's weird and move on. But if you've already got a button pre-installed, like say a parent or a sister or a sibling or, somebody in your job has, hurt your feeling, they've hurt you in some way, and they've left that button there. That person who comes up and then calls you the name is going to hit that button, and you're going to react a lot different because you've already got that button pre-installed. So fear is like that too, where sometimes it's actually not something that's outside of us that is triggering the fear. It is something that is being triggered within us, where it's hitting a button, and it's hitting a button for a reason. It's there to help us clean something up. So that's really interesting. Oftentimes we kind of have this image in our head that we want to be fearless. We want to be able to see these things, encounter these things and whatnot. And we see this, we see ourselves, ignoring the fear and, just having none. And the thing is that fearlessness sometimes can be a facade of strength. To be fearless requires courage, and it's a completely different ballgame. To be fearless requires courage, and it requires courage to not only look at our fear, but to be able to sit in it, to be able to understand it, to be able to make peace with it. And when we've got courage, then we stop being in denial of the fear. And sometimes fearlessness can end up looking like just denial in and of itself. And that's not good, because what we resist, we know this, what we resist always persists. And when we don't acknowledge it, when we don't dig into it and figure out what exactly is going on, it will manifest in other areas of our lives. Fear is hands down, it's an indicator. So our reactions to what we're experiencing always will shape our experience going forward. And if we are running, if we are freezing, if we are fawning the fear, then it will start to dictate what else is going on in our experience. It always does. So we look at a case like the Mothman, right? So we've got a case where the Mothman is now being seen in Chicago, wandering around Chicago. We have a choice as to what story we want to tell about something like the Mothman, right? So a lot of people will turn around and say it is, it's an omen or harbinger of death. It's terrifying and it's scary and it's horrible. But we can also turn around and reframe that and choose a different narrative about something like the Mothman. Yeah, we can't see it, we can't control it, we can't do, we can't interview it and ask it why it's there. But we can turn around and start to look at it as, a bit of a gift. If we know it's there, if we know it's showing up, and we think that it is precursor to a disaster, that can be a wonderful gift and a wonderful message to make us become more aware of our environment, to make us a little bit more conscious. So I think we have to be mindful about the stories that we tell ourselves. especially when it comes down to things like fear and the unwillingness to be afraid. I think fear is important. It's important, and we have to get that. So the big question is, especially as with Halloween coming up, because fear can be fun. It can be a lot of fun too, right? Most people like being like a little scared, like a little bit. And we have to ask ourselves, are we willing to be afraid? It's a big challenge. It's a big challenge. So even if I'm going out to an investigation, I have one next week, out to an acreage that has reports of a dogman type creature, it's always very interesting for me. It's kind of this very, very bizarre sightings of these dogmen walking around this property, especially in the wintertime. And we have to begin to analyze and be aware as to whether or not that fear is something that we're reacting to internally, and be willing to sit with that, or something that is happening outside of ourselves, and it's something to pay attention to. Probably one of the best stories, and one of the stories that stuck out for me the most, in Gavin de Becker's book, The Gift of Fear, was a story about a girl this lady who would leave her apartment every single day for work. And when she came home, and she'd been there for years, she would come home and she started feeling weird in the apartment. And she had no reason, and she kept brushing it off, and oh, it's in my head. But she didn't feel comfortable, and it was to the point where she was really making sure her doors were locked. Things just didn't feel right. What was going on? So it got to the point where it really did start to eat at her. Like it was disturbing her sleep. And she came home one day to see something very interesting. She saw a package that had been dropped off by UPS or Postal Service, and it was out on her balcony. She was not on the ground floor. She was on one of the upper floors. The parcel was out on her balcony, and she had no idea how it had got there. So that set off a whole bunch of red flags. And what she did was she started to put up little like nanny cams, like security cameras, in the house. And she thought, what's it going to hurt, right? The worst it's going to do is record nothing. And it wasn't long before she came home one day and she replayed the footage, and she found somebody was actually coming into her apartment in the daytime while she was at work and trying on her clothes. And she was terrified. She was like, what is going on? And whoever it was accepted the package while he was there and actually put it on the balcony. So it turned out to be somebody in her building that was doing this. So here's a great example of fear actually serving a purpose. And when we get cases of paranormal activity where there's a negative entity involved, what's interesting is that every single client that I have ever had who has had, and it's been loads of people, who have had people or who have had negative encounters or now dealing with a negative haunting, every single one of them said, I knew something was off and I just ignored it. I knew something was off. Something was freaking me out and I didn't know what it was. I thought I was crazy, because we're taught to ignore our internal guidance, right? We're taught to outsource our feelings, and we're taught to outsource our our internal guidance. We really are. And I've seen this so much over the last 8-9 months of people that are just sort of outsourcing their internal guidance to whatever they're being told on the press, or whatever they're being told by their friends. They're being told that there is a reason to be afraid, and they're starting to ignore their own internal guidance and the information in front of them. I really believe that the true warrior is a person who really knows how to be afraid, and how to deal with the fear in a way that they can move themselves forward in a direction that is serving them, serving their purpose, serving their own inner being, rather than being subservient or crippled by the fear that they've got, and realizing this fear is a part of me, is a part of my experience. It is something that I am experiencing. It is not me. It is not me. The fear is not me. The fear is something that you can observe. One of the best meditation techniques for this, if you guys want to get good at this, is being able to sit and observe an object. Sometimes the best thing to do is pick like a plant, like pick something living. Sit and observe it and take the label from it. So what I mean by this is that if you've got something and you just take the label off of it, because our labels come with all sorts of preconceived baggage, take the label from it. And when you can do that, you start observing things from a place of inner silence rather than trying to label and accuse something of the construct that we've already got wrapped up in our heads. And observing emotion can be very similar to this. So you can be able to sit back, observe the fact that you have the fear without putting a label on it. And what will happen is that you end up with this space that's between yourself and the emotion. So you start to identify with yourself, your inner being, and the presence that's there, that's underlying all of the thinking, all the stuff that's going on in your head. And you end up being able to kind of make peace with the fact that you're observing the emotion rather than being wrapped up in it. And you begin to realize that it is not all of you. It's not all of you. There's a piece that's there. So becoming present with it, becoming present with the emotion behind it will make all the difference. We are really never afraid of what we think we're afraid of. We really aren't. We're really not afraid of what we think we're afraid of. As I say, the button would not have been there had it not been pre-installed originally. I saw the creepiest statement actually. Here, this will freak you right out. The creepiest statement the other day, or we were talking about, we were having a discussion online about the Uncanny Valley. And so the Uncanny Valley rule, for those of you guys who don't know, is the idea that people we have a fear of things that look kind of real, like kind of human, but aren't human. Like if anybody saw the last, the Michael Bay's Ninja Turtle film series or whatever, the people were not happy with the design of the Ninja Turtles because they had this weird kind of what they called the Uncanny Valley look, where they looked a little too human and a little less turtle-like, and it freaked people right out. But what's interesting about the Uncanny Valley is that people are the only ones that really have this problem. An animal can accept another animal that sort of looks the same and not be fearful of it. So the discussion was, did we have something way back, a pre-installed button, where we started to learn to be afraid of things that looked similar to people but weren't? And what were they? What was it? What was it that pre-installed that button? So that's going to creep you guys right out for a while. That maybe we have that button because there was something within our experience that we learned to be afraid of things that looked like us but weren't and were dangerous. Now you guys will go to bed tonight like looking under your bed and yeah. But so we have to ask ourselves the question: are we allowing, or are we escaping our fears? Are we allowing them, or are we escaping them? What are we doing? Because we can't do both. It has to be one or the other. Are we allowing, or are we running and escaping? What's going on? A lot of people who will claim to be, I think, fearless, and I'm not afraid of this stuff, and I'm not, they claim to be that. Oftentimes it's a way of escaping the fear of what's going on. I find over the years that I've been doing, 20 years that I've been doing paranormal stuff, what's interesting is that I find that the people who immediately say, it's all crap, I don't believe in it, this is garbage, none of this exists, are usually the people that are the most fearful of paranormal events. And when it happens to them, it is like life altering. They're terrified. They don't know what to do with it. Or when they're presented with evidence that they can't refute, they don't want to hear it. They can't deal with it. And I find most people that claim to be fearless of stuff like that are actually the ones that are the most terrified. It's really interesting. So the ones who are able to say, it freaks me out, I know something's there, I can sit with it, are usually the ones who are allowing. They're doing the allowing. And the ones who are escaping are the ones that are just, they literally, that's it's all wrapped up in their reaction. They're terrified. So it's about acceptance and be able to tune in as well, especially as an investigator, to our own bodies as to what our bodies are telling us, right? And learning the precursors to fear, learning things like, are our hands sweating? Are we, the hair standing up on the back of your neck? Are you getting hot? Are you getting, what are the precursors to fear? What does your body do? Getting in touch with that side of it. I found a great passage today from Ask and It Is Given by the wonderful Esther and Jerry Hicks. And Abraham Hicks, the entities. For those of you guys who do not know Abraham Hicks, I highly recommend their books. So Abraham Hicks, just to give you guys a once-over, is actually a group of entities that are channeled by a lady named Esther Hicks. And they're an incredible group. In my opinion, they are the real deal. And their advice is timeless. And whether or not you believe in the channeling, the book, it doesn't matter. The book will change your world. And they've got a bunch out, and they're absolutely phenomenal. So this is from Ask and It Is Given. I want you guys to check this out in relationship to fear. Check this out. That which is likened to itself is drawn. So the vibration of your being must match the vibration of your desire in order for your desire to be fully received by you. You cannot desire something, predominantly focus on the absence of it, and then expect to receive it, because the vibrational frequency of its absence and the vibrational frequency of its presence are very different frequencies. Another way of saying that is your desires and your beliefs must be a vibrational match in order for you to receive that which you do desire. Here is a glimpse of the bigger picture. You are here having experiences that cause you, in your divinely specific perspective, to identify, consciously or unconsciously, your personal preferences. Now, as that happens, Source energy, who hears you and adores you, immediately answers your vibrational electronic request, whether you are able to put conscious verbal words to it or not. So no matter what you ask for, whether you ask for it with your words or with just a subtle impression of your desire, your request is heard and answered every time. No exceptions. When you ask, it is always given. And because of your exposure to your specific experience, which causes your specific desire to be formulated within you, and because Source hears and answers your request, the universe in which we are all focused expands. And what a wonderful thing. So I think when we look at something like that, when we realize that we really do have the ability to create our reality, we get to choose when it comes down to fear, how we are processing fear, to not let it get hung up and get stuck in what we are offering the universe, right? So the more we are sort of constipated by fear or hurt or pain or anything like that, the more we just hold it inside, ignore it, deny it, do whatever we're doing with it. The less of what we want in our world we are really getting, the less we are getting, the less open we are to receiving the abundance that we are entitled to have. We were born for joy. We really were. And until we can understand that joy is our birthright, we will let things like fear, sit and harbor and whatnot. And we won't be as picky with our healing as we should be. So that when we get something and we get these bizarre encounters like the Mothman and whatnot, we're more likely to hang on to a negative story about something like something even as terrifying as a Mothman, right? And and use it as a totem, as some people do, to direct their fears and frustration with the current level of chaos in the world. I think for a lot of people, they want to make sense of these things. They want to make sense of things like random violence and accidental death and things like that. It's something we cannot control, and we're looking for meaning in the chaos so often. But I think at the end of the day, it really does come back to, what is it for us? What are we choosing? What are we choosing going forward? And And we get to pick how we frame that. So that being said, we have some affirmations to do, y'all. We do. So everybody take a breath. I'm a channel of peace and well-being, and my need for peace is abundantly met. I unconditionally accept, love, and appreciate myself and who I am. I recognize and am grateful for the abundance that is constantly flowing into my life, which I can choose to allow or not. I feel with every breath a sense of peace and love. I help others by maintaining and tending to my connection with Source as much as possible. This well-being is accessible to me, even as in a sea of uncertainty. At this moment, all is well. Hope you guys are still breathing. I am able to liberate myself from my past and live with peace and serenity. I can see and appreciate all the beauty and abundance of the life around me. I am able to embrace love while letting go of fear. And I find peace with the soothing silence of my inner being. Everybody take a breath. I am so thankful for you guys, and we get to do this every Wednesday. So this is the homework, is that over the next week, pay attention to your responses, especially if you're on social media or you're reading things or you're watching the news or watching what's going on around you, what people are saying to you. Pay attention to the inner response that you're having, and start to acknowledge which buttons is it pushing. Is it a pre-installed button? Is there a different way I can choose to look at this now, and to get more picky about our thoughts, because this is going to come in more and more handy as we get closer to, of course, to Halloween, but to the election date as well, because it's causing a lot of anxiety with a lot of people, for very good reason. And I think the more we get to choose about how we're moving forward and how we're looking at what's going on, we realize that we have that power within us. We have our own personal power to influence what is going on around us. So that being said, everybody, you guys can find all these classes on youtube.com/EntitySeeker. I'm going to be doing an interview next week with a really cool podcast, and I'll be putting that up as soon as I get that back. So that should be really fun. I will put the link up. I'm not sure if it's going to be live or not. We'll find out. And then next one? I think it's next Wednesday. I'm going to be at the Renaissance Hotel here in Edmonton doing a sort of a lecture / class with the hotel staff about teaching the living and fear and all of that kind of thing. So that should be really fun. So it's been a quiet October for me because there's no live events, which is so weird. It's so weird. Usually I'm slammed in October, September, November-ish area. So anyway, I will see you guys next Wednesday for more spiritual health care. We'll talk more about Halloween because we gotta and celebrate more about that, and it's gonna be awesome. So have an amazing week, you guys. Have an amazing week, and I will see you all really soon. Bye, everyone.